Hey good people, Batavia here. So welcome to Tomato Gate 2022. Alright, so we have sick tomato plants and we're trying to work our way through it. Today we're going to talk about how we think we got here. We'll take a look at the tomato plants. We'll talk about what our plans are for the rest of the season, since generally it's my preference not to spray if I can help it. And then we'll focus in on what our plans are for the coming growing seasons to try to avoid being in the same spot. All right, to cover off on how we got here, we really have to look at, what we've done over these last years. So as a part of this backyard garden, the space that we're going to look at is basically the space I originally grew in going back to 2008 all the way through now. And primarily it's been summer crops, including tomatoes. As the years progressed, I increased the number of tomatoes that I've grown here. It's my favorite plant to grow, one of my favorite vegetables to eat. I am truly a tomato lover, and that has led me to increase the number that I've grown. Over the course of 2008, going through 2017, I grew in ground. This whole structure didn't exist. But over those years, I'd had various problems with squirrels taking a bite out of a tomato, leaving the rest for you to know what they've done. And it was uber frustrating, right? I started to think about, what if there was a cage over the garden space and they couldn't get to them? So I worked with a buddy of mine in 2018. He built out the 3 raised beds that the cage currently is sitting on. And he built the original version of the cage. I didn't initially have a goal of growing like dozens of tomatoes or anything, but I did want the entire space caged in, and we weren't able to pull that off in 2018. But the whole thing about, what I really wanted kept on nagging at me. So in 2020, this was built, kind of the structure that you see here, and I was in love. I think that's when I transitioned to, now my options are really open. All right, 2020. Beautiful harvest. I actually ended up planting a tomato plant all throughout the space, so that was about 10 or 11 plants. Fast forward to 2021, which was last year, and it was the first year that I really had saw sickness in my plants. And so I say out loud and to myself a number of times, I may need to rotate my tomato plants out of this space and somewhere else in the garden. Now, generally I have the space to do that, but remember, the structure was built for a specific purpose. How do I protect the tomatoes in the same way in the other spaces? I don't have a goal of building a cage like this in every spot of my garden. So, all of that said, got into 2022. Whatever those thoughts were about crop rotation, I tossed out of my head, and I did the exact same thing I did last year in this space. There are 10 tomato plants here, and unfortunately, instead of just 2 being sick like last year, every plant is experiencing some bit of sickness. So this is the honeycomb, and this is what I've continued to see. The second thing I've noticed is a bit of wilting like this, and it's not from over or under watering. I'm pretty sure that that's not the case. This Paul Robeson feels like it never really had a chance. It's definitely some fruit on the plant, as is the case with all of these. This is a black creme. This is probably going to be one of the first that gets pulled from the garden. So now, as we talk about kind of what do we do now that we're here, we are going to harvest aggressively. This is one of 2 Romas, which, remember again, last year was one of the first plants to get sick. This is an Amish paste tomato, right? I've heavily pruned over the course of this season to try to manage this. One of the things that I do religiously is, even when a plant looks healthy, I spray my pruners with rubbing alcohol to disinfect them between each plant anytime I'm pruning them. So again, if it's healthy or if it's sick, with the goal of trying to avoid spreading anything potentially from one plant to another. This is another Roma. Pineapple. There are 2 plants right next to each other. This was such a winner last year. This year, it's almost a sad sight. So this is the second pineapple, a bit better off. This is the Boxcar Willie. And so you could see I've basically pruned. That's probably about 4 feet up. the leaves off, but you know, this again just isn't happy compared to the pepper plants, compared to the zucchini that we saw and the other squash, you know, at the front part of the cage. So how we got here, in plain terms, I think it's just too many years of planting the same crop in the same space. There is likely either some fungus that set in, some type of soil-borne disease, and again, these are just kind of semi-garden educated guesses. And then if you fold in kind of the close proximity I'm growing these plants in, it's very easy for disease to hop from one place to another. So the crops are still good as it relates to the fruit they're producing. We're going to harvest early and often, and then as soon as there's signs of this plant being finished, it's produced what it's going to produce, and I'll probably even take some green tomatoes off of the plant. We're going to cut the plant out. Since we still have so much growing, I'm not going to pull them up yet, but as a general practice, I do pull my plants out of the ground as we go into winter, since they don't break down over our winters. Next year, we're going to really study over the winter crop rotation methods. I'm sure that these methods, while I've kind of been a cynic even over the years when it comes to this, with the exception of my brassicas. I have been more diligent in moving those around, but generally speaking, we're going to look and see kind of across this garden space what we can do to be better stewards of the garden. Definitely for my tomatoes, they're going to have different homes in my garden, and for this space, we'll see what we want to grow here. So I could leave it dormant. I could heavily mulch it and put containers, so have this as a space for my containers. While if it is something that's soil borne, if there's, you know, pests and eggs and things that are landing and staying, you know, over the winter here, they're going to find their way into containers, so that's not a foolproof plan. That would be if I wanted to grow primarily the same types of things in those containers, so that's a consideration to try to avoid that. Where I think I'm landing is really continue to utilize these beds. We'll feed them as we go into the winter, as we go into the spring, and we will plant things that don't have the same demands as these tomato plants and pepper plants. If y'all have any questions or comments, feel free to drop them below. And I look forward to seeing y'all on the next one.